A hotel manager, fueled by an unknown dismissiveness, chose the wrong moment to disrespect Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The polished marble of the Grand Hotel lobby reflected the muted, anxious energy of dozens of staffers, journalists, and security personnel orbiting the central figure of the Congresswoman. Jasmine stood near the reception desk, her posture relaxed but attentive, a folder held lightly in one hand. She had arrived moments ago, expected, requiring a specific set of arrangements made weeks in advance for a crucial series of meetings. The air was thick with the low hum of hushed conversations, the clack of keyboards, and the distant melodic chime of an elevator. Outside, the city pulsed, oblivious to the contained pressure building within these elegant walls. She was tired from travel, but her face showed only calm readiness, a practiced mask of composure honed by years in demanding public spaces. Her gaze swept the lobby, taking in the details, the excessive floral arrangement, the subtle security presence, the harried look on a young staffer's face as they juggled multiple phones. The world often demanded frantic energy around her, but she remained the still point, the eye of the storm, managing the chaos with a quiet, internal rhythm. She listened to her chief of staff, Sarah, speaking softly to the front desk clerk, explaining the requirements one last time. Sarah was efficient, direct, accustomed to navigating the logistical complexities of Jasmine's schedule. The clerk, young and visibly nervous, nodded repeatedly, eyes darting between Sarah's earnest face and something happening behind the counter. There was a pause, a slight hesitation in the clerk's demeanor. A man emerged from a back office, older, impeccably dressed in a crisp suit that spoke of authority and long hours. This was Mr. Harrison, the hotel manager, a name known to their team from the pre-arrival calls. He moved with a certain puffed-up importance, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he approached the counter. He bypassed the clerk, a subtle gesture that immediately shifted the power dynamic at the desk. His attention went directly to Sarah, a practiced, dismissive courtesy in his tone. "There seems to be some confusion," he said, his voice smooth, carrying just a little too loudly in the momentarily hushed space. He didn't look at Jasmine, not yet. He spoke about the requirements to Sarah, but his phrasing carried an unspoken message. It wasn't confusion. It was implied impossibility, perhaps even unreasonableness on their part. The details were specific: a secured meeting room on a particular floor, accessibility considerations, a quiet space for sensitive calls. Standard, but requiring coordination. Harrison made it sound like an outlandish request, delivered at the last minute, though all parties knew that was untrue. He fiddled with a stack of key cards on the counter, avoiding eye contact with Jasmine, who remained silent, observing the interaction. Sarah began to politely reiterate the confirmed arrangements, holding out a printed confirmation email. Harrison waved a dismissive hand, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that spoke volumes about his regard for her words, for the document she offered. Yes, I understand what you believe was arranged," he said, his tone patronizing, a low note of impatience beneath the veneer of professional courtesy. He finally glanced at Jasmine, a quick, assessing look that held no recognition of her status, or perhaps held a calculated disrecognition. It was a look that said, "Oh, it's you." The kind of look that reduced her from a congresswoman to just another guest with inconvenient demands. The air in the lobby, already taut, grew infinitesimally tighter. Jasmine felt the subtle shift, the familiar prickle of being minimized, categorized, and dismissed, before a single substantive word had passed her lips. It wasn't new. It was a worn path, a landscape she knew intimately. The inclination was not to react, to absorb the microaggression as she had thousands before, to let it pass like a minor static shock. But this time, it felt different, more deliberate, more public. She remained still, her hands resting lightly on her folder. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on Harrison. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched him. The young clerk behind the counter seemed to shrink further into themselves, sensing the undercurrents, the invisible lines being drawn. Sarah, sensing the shift in Jasmine, paused her explanation, her own body language freezing into watchful stillness. The quiet in their immediate vicinity became deliberate, a pocket of heavy silence amidst the lobby's background noise. Harrison, perhaps misinterpreting her silence as passive acceptance, puffed up slightly more, launching into a prepared explanation of why their confirmed arrangements were, in fact, impossible now. He spoke of unforeseen maintenance, double bookings, logistical nightmares beyond his control, standard excuses delivered with a practiced, insincere regret. His gaze flickered away from Jasmine again, addressing his explanation to Sarah, to the counter, to the air itself, anywhere but directly to the woman whose plans he was dismantling with such casual authority. It was a performance of power, a small, localized display of control, enacted upon a black woman and her team in a public space. Jasmine felt the weight of it, not just the inconvenience, but the symbolic weight, the history embedded in that dismissive wave, that patronizing tone, that deliberate avoidance of direct address. It was a reminder of who, in his view, held the authority in this interaction. And it wasn't her. She took a slow, steady breath, the kind that went unnoticed by anyone watching, a silent anchoring against the pull of frustration or the temptation to assert her position forcefully. That wasn't her way. Her strength lay in stillness, in observation, in allowing the other person to fully reveal themselves in their disregard. She let him speak, let him build his flimsy edifice of excuses and managerial importance. Every word he spoke, every dismissive glance, every affectation of authority, he was revealing not her supposed difficulty, but his own smallness, his own willingness to disrespect. The subtle expressions on the faces of the staffer, the journalist nearby pretending to be engrossed in their phone, the quiet concern in Sarah's eyes, they were mirrors, reflecting the unfolding dynamic, amplifying the unspoken tension. This wasn't just about a hotel room anymore. It was about visibility, about respect, about the quiet battle against institutional friction that seemed to follow her path through certain spaces. She stood, dignified and silent, allowing the manager's words to hang in the air, creating a void that he seemed eager to fill with the sound of his own voice, digging his own quiet hole with every uttered sentence. His performance continued, oblivious to the shift he had ignited not just in the immediate circle, but potentially in the wider space where eyes were now, subtly, turning towards the woman who stood so still, absorbing the tide of his disrespect without visible reaction. The manager, Mr. Harrison, finished his explanation of impossibility with a flourish, a final regretful shrug that was meant to signal the conversation was over, the decision final. He turned back to the young clerk, a slight smile of self-satisfaction playing on his lips, as if he had just masterfully defused a difficult situation, rather than created one. He still hadn't properly addressed Jasmine. Sarah stepped forward, ready to present their case again, perhaps mention the seniority of the officials involved in the planned meetings, the confirmed nature of the booking, the potential implications of the disruption. But before she could speak, Jasmine raised a hand, a small, quiet gesture that stopped Sarah mid-sentence. It was not a command, but an indication, a silent signal that Jasmine would handle this now, in her own way. Her gaze remained fixed on Mr. Harrison's, retreating back for a moment, then shifted as he turned, perhaps surprised by the sudden silence where he expected further negotiation or protest. For the first time since emerging from his office, he looked directly at Jasmine, waiting for her reaction. His expression was a mix of weary expectation and lingering condescension. He seemed prepared for frustration, perhaps even anger, a reaction he could easily categorize and dismiss as difficult guest behavior. What he was not prepared for was the quiet intensity of her gaze, the complete absence of frustration or anger. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed to strip away his layers of performative authority. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't demand anything, she simply spoke, her voice low, clear, and perfectly steady, cutting through the residual hum of the lobby. "Mr. Harrison," she said, the name a simple acknowledgement devoid of inflection. "I understand protocols." She paused, a beat of silence that felt longer than it was, allowing the simple statement to land. Her eyes didn't waver from his. The young clerk behind the counter looked up, startled by the direct address, by the unexpected calm in her voice. Sarah watched, her earlier tension replaced by a quiet, watchful anticipation. A man sitting in a nearby chair, engrossed in his laptop, subtly shifted his posture, his attention caught by the sudden, focused quiet radiating from the interaction at the desk. Jasmine continued, her voice still level, deliberate. "I understand the complexities of managing a large property." She acknowledged his stated domain, his expertise, stripping away any possible defense that she was ignorant of his challenges. But then, the quiet power of her phrasing began to assert itself. "What I don't understand," she said, her voice dropping just slightly, becoming more intimate, more pointed, "is why those protocols seem to necessitate this particular interaction. It wasn't an accusation, not a question demanding an answer about the room. It was a statement about the dynamic, about how he had chosen to interact with her. She wasn't challenging his facts. She was challenging his behavior." Mr. Harrison's confident posture faltered just slightly. The color drained imperceptibly from his face. He seemed caught off guard by the angle of her response. He had anticipated a fight about a room number, a complaint about inconvenience. He had not anticipated being called out so calmly and publicly on the manner of his disrespect. His gaze flickered away from hers for a fraction of a second. A tell. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "Congresswoman," he began, his tone shifting, a hint of recognition belatedly entering his voice, a recognition that was perhaps dawning on him with a sudden, cold clarity. It was the kind of tone people adopted when they realized they had made a significant error in judgment regarding someone's identity or standing. But he still seemed to be fumbling for a way to reassert control, to pivot back to the logistical excuse. Jasmine didn't let him. She maintained her gaze, her silent expectation drawing his attention back. She wasn't angry. She was simply present, requiring him to be present with her, to acknowledge the reality of the moment he had created. The silence stretched again, heavy with unspoken implications. Onlookers were no longer subtle. They were watching, their eyes moving between the composed congresswoman and the visibly uncomfortable hotel manager. Phones that had been casually held were now angled, screens dark, recording lights potentially blinking unseen. The quiet performance of disrespect was turning into a public spectacle, not through shouting or confrontation, but through the sheer, immovable dignity of one person in the face of another's awkward, exposed disregard. Mr. Harrison opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He seemed to be searching for the right words, words that could simultaneously salvage his authority, explain the situation, and perhaps belatedly offer the respect he had initially withheld. But no such words came easily. Jasmine didn't press him. She simply waited, her stillness demanding more than any outburst could. She wasn't asking for an apology or a groveling correction. She was simply allowing him to sit in the space he had created, the space of his own making, under the quiet scrutiny of her gaze and the growing awareness of those around them. The air, moments ago thick with his officious pronouncements, was now thin and sharp with the reality of the moment, a reality amplified by the silent witnesses. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a quiet, powerful assertion of presence and worth, enacted not through force, but through unwavering calm. He shifted his weight, looked away again, then back, trapped by her quiet expectation. The elaborate floral arrangement nearby seemed almost comical in its cheerful indifference to the human drama unfolding beside it. The distant city outside continued its rhythm, unaware that within this insulated world of hospitality and power dynamics, a small, significant reckoning was beginning, initiated not by loud protest, but by a single, clear statement about understanding. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat again, the sound tight and dry. He attempted a small, placating smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congresswoman, I assure you, there's been no disrespect intended," he managed, the words sounding hollow even to him. It was a standard, easily deployed defense against the accusation of bias or poor treatment, claim lack of intent. But intent wasn't what Jasmine had addressed. She hadn't accused him of disrespecting her intentionally. She had simply pointed out that his actions necessitated this interaction, an interaction born of his dismissive behavior. She didn't respond to his claim of no intent. She didn't need to. His face, which moments before held a practiced composure, was now a roadmap of discomfort. His eyes darted around the lobby, no longer dismissive but seeking an escape route. finding none. The handful of people who had turned their attention towards the interaction at the counter now seemed glued to the scene. The journalist, laptop now closed on his lap, was openly watching, a flicker of recognition in his eyes as he processed who the calm woman was. The aide, Sarah, stood rigidly beside Jasmine, her expression a mirror of focused observation, ready to act if needed, but understanding that Jasmine was handling this in her unique, powerful way. A woman with a child waiting by the elevators discreetly angled her phone, pretending to check the time. The energy in the immediate vicinity had shifted entirely. It was no longer the polite, distant hum of a hotel lobby. It was charged, silent, expectant. Jasmine felt the shift, the subtle convergence of attention. It wasn't attention she sought, but she recognized its power. In moments like this, silence could be louder than shouting, stillness more impactful than aggressive movement. She held his gaze, allowing the weight of the public attention to press down on him. He was trapped, not by her words, but by his own actions and the quiet dignity of her response. He fumbled with the keycards again, a nervous tick. "Perhaps," he stammered, "perhaps we could revisit the arrangements. There might be a possibility on a different floor." The sudden concession, offered not as a helpful solution but as a desperate attempt to escape the discomfort of the moment, was jarring. Minutes ago, everything was impossible. Now, possibility was suddenly on the table, not because the logistics had changed, but because the social dynamic had. This was the heart of the issue, the swiftness with which impossible melted away, when the person being inconvenienced was no longer someone who could be easily dismissed, when their identity and presence demanded a level of respect initially withheld. Jasmine didn't react to the concession either. She didn't nod, didn't offer a gracious acceptance, didn't rush to seize the offered alternative. She let it hang there, a small, insufficient bridge offered across the chasm he had created. Her silence forced him to continue speaking, to fill the void, to expose further his shift in behavior. "Yes," he pressed on, his voice gaining a false note of efficiency, trying to sound like the capable manager he initially purported to be. "Let me just check something quickly. I'm sure we can find a suitable space." He turned towards a computer terminal behind the counter, his back momentarily to the lobby, a clear desire to escape the direct line of Jasmine's gaze. It was a small victory, this forcing of his retreat, not won through force of will or demand, but through the quiet power of her composure. The moment of his dismissal had been public, and so too would be the moment of his retraction. As he fumbled with the computer, the young clerk who had been watching wide-eyed risked a quick sympathetic glance towards Jasmine. It was a silent acknowledgement, a subtle nod of understanding that transcended the professional distance between them. Jasmine met the clerk's gaze with a brief, acknowledging nod of her own. It was a small, human connection in a moment defined by impersonal friction. Mr. Harrison turned back, a forced smile in place. "Ah, yes," he said, holding up a key card as if it were a rare treasure. "We do have a room available. The Magnolia Suite. It's on the executive floor. It should meet your requirements. My apologies for the earlier miscommunication." The word miscommunication was a convenient, inaccurate label for what had occurred. It implied a misunderstanding of words, not a deliberate lack of regard. Jasmine knew it, Harrison knew it, and everyone watching knew it. She took a slow breath, not of relief, but of continued contemplation. The immediate problem of the room was solved, not through negotiation or appeal, but through the sheer, undeniable pressure of her presence and the silent, growing audience. But the incident wasn't just about the room. It was about the initial assumption, the casual disregard, the expectation that she could be treated in a way that she would not tolerate, that she should not have to tolerate. The insult, subtle yet potent, lingered in the air, undispelled by his hasty concession. The shift in his demeanor was complete, from officious dismissal to flustered accommodation, but the reason for the shift was clear, not a sudden understanding of her needs, but a sudden understanding of her identity and the potential consequences of disrespecting it in a public space. Jasmine took the keycard from Mr. Harrison's outstretched hand. Her fingers brushed his briefly. His felt cool and slightly clammy. She didn't thank him effusively or offer a smile of relief. She simply accepted the key, a physical object representing the resolution of the immediate logistical problem, but doing nothing to erase the preceding moments. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she said, her tone neutral, polite, maintaining the same quiet dignity that had defined the interaction. There was no warmth in her voice, no forgiveness in her eyes, just a simple, factual acknowledgement of the exchange. It was not a moment of reconciliation, but merely the necessary end to a brief, uncomfortable encounter. He seemed to expect more, perhaps a word of gracious acceptance that would allow him to retreat fully from the exposed position he found himself in. But Jasmine offered none. She turned slightly, gesturing towards the elevators. "Sarah," she said softly to her chief of staff, "let's proceed." Sarah nodded, stepping forward to gather their minimal belongings. The movement broke the intense focus at the counter, allowing the watching journalist to look back at his laptop, the woman with the child to face the elevator doors fully, the energy in the lobby to slowly begin to redistribute itself. But the moment lingered. As Jasmine and Sarah walked towards the bank of elevators, she could feel the residual energy, the quiet hum of observation that followed them. People weren't staring overtly, but their attention was still there, a subtle, palpable awareness. She didn't look back at Mr. Harrison. There was nothing more to gain from that interaction, nothing more to say to him in that moment. The crucial part had already been said, not just in her quiet statement about understanding protocols, but in her unwavering presence in the face of his initial disregard. As they waited for the elevator, Sarah leaned in slightly, her voice low. "Are you okay, Congresswoman?" she asked, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and quiet admiration. It wasn't a question about physical well-being, but about the emotional toll of such moments, the quiet strength it required to absorb and deflect that kind of dismissive energy. Jasmine met Sarah's gaze. She offered a small, genuine smile, a private moment shared between them that acknowledged the public performance they had just navigated. "I'm fine, Sarah," Jasmine replied softly. "Just processing." Processing was a simple word, but it encompassed the complex internal work required in moments like these. It wasn't enough to simply survive the disrespect. She had to process it, understand its roots, and decide how, or if, to address it on a larger scale. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. They stepped inside, the doors sliding shut, providing a brief, enclosed sanctuary from the lingering gaze of the lobby. Inside the elevator, the atmosphere was different. Quiet, insulated. Sarah pressed the button for the executive floor. "He was incredibly rude," Sarah said, her voice tinged with indignation, now free to express the frustration she had held in check moments before. "Just so dismissive." Jasmine nodded slowly, looking at her reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors. "He was," she agreed, her voice calm. "It happens." The simple phrase, "it happens," carried the weight of countless similar encounters, a lifetime of navigating spaces where her presence was questioned, minimized, or simply treated with less inherent respect than others. It wasn't an acceptance of the behavior, but a weary acknowledgement of its frequency. "Still," Sarah insisted, "after you said that about understanding protocols," the way he just melted. Jasmine allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible sigh. "He realized," she said quietly, "that he wasn't just dismissing a guest. He was dismissing a congresswoman, and that changes the equation for some people." She didn't say all people, or even most people. She said some people. That was the subtle, precise truth. For some, identity unlocked respect. For others, it was irrelevant. And for a persistent, frustrating few, it was a reason for more disrespect, a challenge to be met with an assertion of their own small power. The elevator reached their floor. As the doors opened, they stepped out into a quiet, luxurious hallway. The Magnolia Suite was indeed suitable, spacious and quiet. But as they began to settle in, arranging papers and preparing for the day's work, the image of Mr. Harrison's face, his initial dismissiveness melting into flustered accommodation, remained with Jasmine. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that settled over her, but a familiar weariness mixed with a quiet resolve. The incident was small in the grand scheme of things, a momentary unpleasantness in a hotel lobby, but it was also a microcosm, a perfect, contained example of the subtle, often public ways that power dynamics and implicit biases played out in everyday interactions. And she knew, with a certainty born of experience, that moments like these, however small they seemed at the time, often didn't stay small. In the age of ubiquitous cameras and instant sharing, a quietly powerful moment could ripple outward, far beyond the confines of a single hotel lobby. She unpacked her laptop, the familiar weight of it grounding her. The work ahead was demanding, important, but the incident with Mr. Harrison had added another layer to the day, another piece of data in the ongoing, quiet struggle for simple recognition and respect in spaces where it wasn't automatically granted. The silence in the suite felt different from the silence in the lobby. This was a chosen quiet, a space for reflection and preparation. The other was a charged public silence, a stage for an unspoken drama. As the day progressed, the incident in the lobby began its inevitable journey into the digital ether. Someone, likely the journalist or perhaps another guest whose interest had been piqued, had captured the crucial exchange. Not the whole thing, perhaps, but the moment when Mr. Harrison's face changed, when Jasmine's quiet statement about understanding protocols landed with unexpected force, when his flustered concession offered stark contrast to his initial dismissiveness. The clip, likely short and without much context, began circulating. At first, it was confined to small circles, perhaps shared among political staffers or journalists who recognized the players. But the visual symbolism was potent. The calm, composed black congresswoman standing still, against the visibly uncomfortable retreating white manager. It tapped into a widely understood narrative of microaggression, power dynamics, and the quiet ways dignity asserts itself. Sarah's phone buzzed intermittently throughout the morning meetings. She would glance at it, her brow furrowed slightly, then swipe the notifications away, prioritizing the work at hand. But the frequency increased. During a brief break between meetings, Sarah approached Jasmine, her expression serious. "Congresswoman," she said, her voice low. "The lobby incident. It's getting picked up online." Jasmine nodded slowly. She had anticipated this possibility from the moment she felt the shift in the lobby's energy, saw the subtle angles of phone screens. She had lived enough of her public life in the digital age to know that moments of friction, moments that exposed uncomfortable truths about power or bias, were often amplified by the online world. "What kind of pickup?" Jasmine asked, her voice calm, showing no surprise. "It's mostly just the clip right now," Sarah explained, scrolling through her phone. "Someone captured you saying, 'What I don't understand is why those protocols seem to necessitate this particular interaction.' And him fumbling. It's getting shared, people are reacting, some are praising your calm, others are criticizing him. It's blowing up a little." Jasmine listened, her gaze steady. She didn't reach for her own phone. She didn't need to see the numbers, the shares, the comments to understand the phenomenon. A contained moment of personal disrespect, met with quiet composure, had been released into the public square, becoming a Rorschach test for online viewers, reflecting their own experiences and perspectives on power, race, and public behavior. The viral moment, often sought and curated by public figures, had found her, unplanned and organic, born not of a calculated performance, but of an authentic response to a real interaction. And the core of the virality, Sarah confirmed, was that single line, delivered so quietly, so deliberately. "What I don't understand is why those protocols seem to necessitate this particular interaction." It wasn't an emotional outburst. It wasn't a demand. It was a question posed about the necessity of the interaction itself, highlighting that the difficulty wasn't inherent in the request, but in the way the request had been handled, in the attitude it had elicited. That phrasing, so calm yet so pointed, seemed to resonate. It captured the insidious nature of certain types of disrespect, not overt aggression, but a subtle bureaucratic obstruction, a dismissive attitude framed as professional procedure. It implied that the protocol he was following wasn't a real rule, but a convenient excuse for his behavior, his bias, his assumption of who deserved swift, respectful service and who did not. Sarah showed her a few screenshots, tweets praising her grace under pressure, comments calling out the manager's smarmy attitude, analyses dissecting the nonverbal cues in the clip. It was quickly becoming a thing, a minor news cycle, a topic of online debate. Jasmine looked at the screenshots briefly, absorbing the reaction without getting lost in it. She saw her face, captured mid-sentence, calm and unwavering. She saw Mr. Harrison's face blurred with motion or pixelation, but his discomfort still evident. She saw the comments section, a familiar mix of support, outrage, and predictable online noise. "Okay," she said, handing the phone back to Sarah. "Let's keep an eye on it. But the meetings are the priority." She deliberately shifted the focus back to the work at hand, refusing to allow the online storm to derail her day or consume her attention. But the existence of the clip, its spread, and the public reaction added a new layer to her experience of the incident. It was no longer just a moment between her and Mr. Harrison in the lobby. It was a shared moment, a public lesson unfolding in real time for millions. The viral quote, "What I don't understand is why those protocols seem to necessitate this particular interaction," was a small rhetorical hammer, delivered with quiet precision in the moment, now amplified by the internet, echoing beyond the hotel walls, forcing people to consider the necessity of everyday disrespect, the protocols that enable it, and the power dynamics inherent in who gets to enforce them and upon whom. Wasn't the loudest line she had ever uttered, but perhaps in its quiet, reflective power, it was one of the most effective. The viral clip and the surrounding discussion continued to grow throughout the day. By late afternoon, it wasn't just online chatter. Media outlets were starting to pick it up. Local news affiliates were reporting on the hotel incident, and national political blogs were analyzing the clip, framing it as an example of the microaggressions faced by women of color in positions of power. Requests for comment started flooding in. Sarah managed the influx, politely deflecting most of them, explaining that the Congresswoman was focused on her scheduled meetings. But the narrative was solidifying. A Congresswoman treated poorly by a hotel manager responded with remarkable calm and a quietly devastating line that exposed the manager's unprofessional behavior. Mr. Harrison's name wasn't always used, but his face and the hotel's brand were becoming linked to the incident online. It was clear that the instant regret the title promised was likely settling in. During a brief window in her schedule, Jasmine sat down with Sarah to discuss how to handle the situation. There was no panic, no sense of crisis, just a calm assessment of the options. "They want a statement," Sarah said, referring to the press. "Or an interview. Everyone wants to hear your side of the story." Jasmine considered this, looking out the window at the city skyline. Her side of the story wasn't just about a rude manager. It was about the pattern, the systemic nature of these interactions, the exhausting frequency with which basic respect had to be earned rather than being freely given. A simple, "He was rude and I was calm," wasn't sufficient to capture the deeper truth. "I don't want to make it about him," Jasmine said finally, her voice thoughtful. "Or about me, really, as an individual seeking retribution." She knew the danger of framing it as a personal grievance, which could allow it to be dismissed as an isolated incident or individual sensitivity. The power of the moment lay in its representational quality, its illustration of a larger truth. "It's not about one manager on one day," she continued. "It's about the thousands of similar interactions that happen every day, in every city, to people who don't have a camera on them, who don't have a title that makes people suddenly reconsider their behavior." This was the reframing, the subtle shift from a personal anecdote to a social commentary. It wasn't her fight against him. It was an example of a pervasive issue. "How do we talk about it?" she posed, not just to Sarah but to the question itself, in a way that centers the behavior, not the person, the system, not the isolated incident. This was the rhetorical challenge. How to use a viral moment to highlight a systemic issue, without becoming just another voice adding to the online noise, or worse, contributing to a pile-on against an individual, even one who deserved criticism. She decided against a lengthy, formal statement or a sit-down interview immediately. The moment was still too hot, too prone to misinterpretation or sensationalism. A delayed, more controlled response would be more effective. Something that wasn't reactive, but reflective. Something that used the incident as a jumping-off point for a broader conversation. She thought about the manager's initial look, that quick, assessing glance that had dismissed her. She thought about his subsequent flustered retreat. It wasn't her title that should have garnered respect. It was her inherent dignity, her simple status as a human being requesting a service she was entitled to. The title had merely served as a public lever, forcing a recognition that should have been present from the start. "Let's wait," Jasmine said. "Let the initial wave pass. We'll address it, but on our terms, in our time." She wanted the response to be measured, thoughtful, aligning with the quiet power she had displayed in the moment itself. She didn't want to shout. She wanted to speak with the same calm clarity that had cut through the noise in the lobby. She envisioned using the moment to talk about the cumulative weight of microaggressions, the drain they impose, the subtle ways they reinforce societal hierarchies. She could talk about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their title or perceived status. She could use the manager's phrase, miscommunication, and contrast it with the reality of deliberate disregard. She could echo her own viral line, understanding protocols, and expand on what true understanding entails, not just rules, but respect. The incident in the lobby, initially a frustrating inconvenience, was transforming into something else, a powerful, unplanned platform for a necessary conversation. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the quietest moments, the most contained displays of dignity under pressure, could have the loudest, most far-reaching impact. The manager's disrespect hadn't just been a momentary lapse. It had become a public lesson, initiated not by design, but by the unexpected confluence of a small act of disregard and a powerful, composed response. The waiting period allowed the initial intensity of the online reaction to peak and then begin to subside, leaving behind a lingering awareness of the incident. News articles had been written, think pieces published, and the clip of Jasmine's quiet line continued to be shared, finding new audiences. Public opinion, as captured in comments and online polls, seemed largely in support of Jasmine, recognizing the underlying dynamic of the encounter. There was widespread praise for her composure and criticism for the manager's demeanor. The narrative had firmly shifted from "Congresswoman has hotel trouble" to "Hotel manager disrespects Congresswoman, exposes own bias." This shift was crucial for Jasmine. It moved the focus away from her as a demanding guest and onto the behavior of the institution's representative. When Jasmine did choose to address the incident publicly, it was not in a combative interview or a fiery speech. It was during a planned press briefing on a different topic, held days later. Towards the end, a journalist inevitably asked about the hotel incident. Jasmine paused, her expression calm and measured. She didn't launch into a detailed recounting of the events or express personal outrage. Instead, she spoke in broader terms, using the incident as an illustration. "I appreciate the question," she began, her voice steady and clear, "and I know there's been significant attention given to a recent interaction at a hotel." She acknowledged the public awareness without centering the drama. While the specifics of that particular incident are less important than the principle, it does offer us an opportunity to reflect on how we treat one another in public spaces. This was the core of her message, shifting the focus from the personal to the universal principle of how people should be treated. "Often," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the journalists, "disrespect doesn't come in loud, aggressive packages. It's often subtle, bureaucratic, couched in language about rules or procedures." This directly referenced the manager's initial approach, the framing of the problem as confusion and the reliance on protocols. She was dissecting the method of the disrespect. It's the quiet dismissal, the assumption that you are less important, less deserving of courtesy or clarity based on perceptions. The pause before perceptions was brief but significant, inviting listeners to fill in the blanks. Perceptions based on race, gender, perceived status, or a combination thereof. "These moments," she said, her voice gaining a quiet intensity, "are not merely inconvenient. They are eroding. They chip away at your sense of belonging, your right to simply exist in a space without having your presence questioned or minimized." This articulated the deeper impact of microaggressions, the emotional and psychological toll they take, particularly on marginalized individuals who face them repeatedly. She spoke about the power dynamics at play, not with anger, but with clear-eyed analysis. When someone in a position of authority, however small that authority may seem, uses that position to exert unnecessary control or demonstrate dismissiveness, it's not just about that one interaction. It's about reinforcing a system where some people are accustomed to being deferred to, and others are expected to defer. She avoided naming the manager or the hotel, keeping the focus on the behavior and the system. This was a deliberate choice, preventing the conversation from devolving into a debate about one person's job or one company's policy, and keeping it focused on the broader societal patterns. She then brought it back to her viral line, echoing the phrasing but giving it new, expanded meaning. I said in that moment that I understood protocols but didn't understand why they necessitated that interaction. And I meant that. Because true professionalism, true understanding of how things work, isn't about asserting power over others. It's about facilitating, about respect, about ensuring everyone, regardless of who they are or what they look like, is treated with the basic dignity they deserve. This was the delayed rhetorical hammer, taking the quiet phrase that had gone viral and embedding it within a larger, more profound argument about the nature of respect and authority. It reframed the incident not just as a momentary lapse, but as a failure of fundamental principles of human interaction and professional conduct. She didn't call for the manager's job or demand apologies. Her goal wasn't punitive. It was educational and transformative. She wanted people to see the incident not just as entertainment or outrage fodder, but as a mirror reflecting everyday indignities and the quiet strength required to navigate them. The quiet dignity she had displayed in the lobby was now amplified by the thoughtful clarity of her public response, giving the viral moment depth and purpose beyond fleeting online attention. The public reaction to Jasmine's deliberate, measured response was significant. It was praised for its nuance and depth, shifting the conversation from a simple, rude manager gets caught story to a more meaningful discussion about respect, power, and the insidious nature of microaggressions. Comment sections on news articles and social media, while still containing the usual noise, now featured more reflective discussions. People shared their own stories of similar encounters, recognizing the pattern Jasmine had described, the subtle dismissals, the bureaucratic hurdles used as tools of control, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove one's worthiness of basic courtesy. The hotel, facing negative publicity stemming from the viral clip and the subsequent news coverage, reportedly addressed the incident internally. While the details were not widely publicized, there were reports of the hotel issuing a statement emphasizing their commitment to guest satisfaction and respect for all individuals. Mr. Harrison's fate remained private, but the title's promise of him wishing he hadn't disrespected her seemed fulfilled. The public exposure and internal scrutiny were likely consequences he had not anticipated when he chose his initial dismissive tone. Jasmine's calm handling of the situation became a case study in dignified response, a model for how to confront disrespect without resorting to the same energy. Her silence in the moment of insult, her quiet, piercing question about necessity, and her later, measured public reframing combined to create a powerful counter-narrative. She didn't become the angry black woman. She remained the composed, intelligent congresswoman, using her experience not for personal drama, but for public education. The emotional ripple effect was palpable. For those who had experienced similar disrespect, seeing Jasmine handle it with such grace and then articulate the systemic issue validated their own experiences. It provided language for feelings that were often hard to articulate, the feeling of being subtly erased or minimized. Her restraint wasn't seen as weakness but as immense strength, a deliberate choice not to engage on the terms set by the aggressor, but to maintain her own equilibrium and later redefine the terms of the conversation entirely. The image of her standing quietly at the counter, absorbing the manager's words with unwavering eye contact while he fidgeted, became a powerful visual symbol. It represented a reversal of the expected dynamic, the person being disrespected, holding the power through stillness and observation, while the person exerting authority became visibly uncomfortable under her calm gaze. This quiet assertion of power resonated deeply with many. It showed that confrontation wasn't the only way to command respect, and that sometimes the most powerful response was a dignified silence, followed by a thoughtful articulation of the truth. The viral moment had not only captured an instance of disrespect, it had captured a masterclass in how to respond to it, not with aggression, but with composure and clarity. The manager's brief moment of dismissiveness had inadvertently provided a platform for Jasmine to teach a valuable lesson about the persistent reality of microaggressions and the quiet strength required to navigate them. The incident faded from the immediate headlines, but the viral clip and Jasmine's words lingered in the collective memory of those who had witnessed it. A small, potent reminder that dignity, when asserted with quiet power, could cut through condescension and reveal the true nature of disrespect, forcing a reckoning that extended far beyond a single hotel lobby. The conversation had been pushed forward, not by shouting, but by a calm voice asking a simple, profound question about necessity. The quiet after the online storm felt different. The incident had been processed, debated, and, for many, absorbed as a powerful example. The hotel manager, Mr. Harrison, was no longer the focus. The larger themes Jasmine had highlighted, the insidious nature of microaggressions, the power dynamics in everyday interactions, the exhaustion they caused, had taken center stage in many subsequent conversations online and in media. Jasmine continued her demanding schedule, traveling, meeting, legislating, but the incident had left a subtle mark, not of bitterness, but of reinforced purpose. It underscored the importance of her work, the need to constantly challenge systems and attitudes that diminished individuals. She knew that her experience, amplified by her platform and the virality of the moment, was just one story among millions. For every public incident like hers, there were countless private ones absorbed in silence, leaving invisible bruises. Her ability to articulate the systemic nature of the disrespect, to connect her personal experience to a broader pattern, was what gave the moment lasting power. It wasn't just about her feeling disrespected. It was about shining a light on how disrespect often manifested and who was disproportionately subjected to it. The viral quote, "What I don't understand is why those protocols seem to necessitate this particular interaction," evolved from a moment of calm defiance into a meme, a shorthand for calling out performative bureaucratic obstruction rooted in something less professional. It was used in different contexts, applied to various situations where authority was wielded arbitrarily or disrespectfully under the guise of following rules. This organic spread of her words, divorced from the original context but carrying the same core meaning, was a testament to their universal resonance. People recognized the behavior she described because they had experienced it themselves or witnessed it happening to others. The stillness she embodied in the lobby became a visual metaphor for dignity under pressure, a quiet strength that disarmed and exposed. It was a powerful counterpoint to the expectation that disrespect should be met with immediate, equally forceful reaction. Her approach demonstrated that there was power in choosing when and how to engage, that sometimes the most effective response was delayed, thoughtful, and aimed at educating rather than simply retaliating. The incident also reinforced the critical role of bystanders and observers. The people in the lobby who noticed, who recorded, who shared, they were essential players in turning a private moment of disrespect into a public reckoning. Their silent witness, their decision to capture and disseminate the interaction, ensured that the manager's behavior did not disappear into the anonymity of everyday slights. It held him, and by extension, the institution he represented, accountable. Sarah, her chief of staff, reflected on the incident privately, witnessing Jasmine's composure up close and the subsequent impact of her response. It was a masterclass in political communication and personal strength, demonstrating how to leverage an unexpected negative event into a positive, impactful message. She saw the toll such moments took, the quiet processing Jasmine mentioned in the elevator. But she also saw the unwavering commitment to using these challenges to fuel a larger purpose. There was no gloating, no sense of triumph over an individual, but a quiet satisfaction in seeing the discussion shift, in seeing the subtle dynamics of power and disrespect laid bare for public examination. The echoes of the lobby incident lingered, a reminder that even small acts of disregard, when met with dignity and framed with clarity, could ignite significant conversations and contribute to a broader understanding of the world. It was a testament to the power of composure, the impact of carefully chosen words, and the potential for viral moments to serve a purpose far greater than fleeting fame. The quiet power had resonated, and the message, carried on the back of an unfortunate interaction, had landed. If this story moved you, share it. Not to go viral, but to remind people what dignity looks like.